Hello, and welcome to The Third Space, the podcast for those who see the beauty of Catholicism as well as the ugliness, who've experienced real harm and real grace in the Church. I'm your host, Paul Fahey, a mental health counselor and catechist. In every episode, I will have conversations with guests about the good and the bad in the Church, avoiding easy answers or black and white fundamentalism in order to hold on to all that is true. Today I'm talking with Rhonda Miska about what life is like for a Catholic, for a parish worker in the Twin Cities right now. I once again postponed my normal Monday morning release to today so that I could publish this conversation, which was recorded last night, Monday, February 9th. Rhonda Miska is a preacher, writer, spiritual director, and lay ecclesial minister. Since 2020, she has served as the Director of Communications at the Church of St. Timothy in Blaine, a north suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. She holds a master's degree from the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry and is currently pursuing a Doctor of Ministry and Preaching degree from the Aquinas Institute of Theology. Rhonda, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We are very recent acquaintances. You are a parish minister working for the Church of St. Timothy in the Twin Cities. You had emailed me a couple of weeks ago to introduce yourself and to share some of your own experiences being a parish minister in the Twin Cities right now. And it was a marvelous email to receive. You expressed your gratitude for this podcast, some of the work I was doing, which is always encouraging to hear. But then it was so encouraging hearing the work that you're doing on the ground. And the ways that you're seeing Catholics being Catholics in a really good way on the ground. But it was also tough to read. At one point in your email, you wrote, and I'll quote you. You said, "One item on my to-do list is to promote the Lenten fish fry dinners, and another is to call a mom vulnerable to deportation to see if she has to find someone to assume DOPA, your delegation of parental authority for her kids." Having worked in parish ministry for several years, I've experienced that imbalance of like, here's some clerical work, and then here's like talking with someone about just going through a divorce or something like that. But this felt more weighty than most of what I've done. And after reading your email, I wanted to have you on just to share what life is like as a Catholic on the ground in Minneapolis right now. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Paul. Yeah, I'm a fan of the show, so it's exciting to share in conversation.
Yeah. Um, First, before we jump in, I'd love to hear your story. Like, what led you to being a parish minister in the Catholic Church?
Yeah, well, I'm a cradle Catholic, so born and raised in the Madison area of Wisconsin, and I always liked church as a kid. I was sort of a churchy kid and, sang in the church choir and was involved with, being a lector in different ministries. And then, when I was an undergraduate, I got involved with my Newman Center, and that was really, really significant and transformative for me. So it just kind of unfolded from there. Then after college, I was a Jesuit volunteer in Nicaragua for 2 years. And my first parish ministry job, it just felt like as I looked at the job description and I looked at what I was passionate about, it was like, oh, there's an alignment here. And something else I've been thinking about just in the last couple of weeks with everything that's going on is so my mother, who is retired now, but still lives in my hometown, Middleton, Wisconsin, and she is just one of those people who connects. Like I have just so many memories of being a kid and overhearing her on a phone conversation where she was like calling someone who had a truck and someone else who needed to move a bed, or knowing that this person had this thing and was trying to get rid of it and this person could use it. And she actually worked for a time at a nonprofit called Middleton Outreach Ministry. So I think just this very practical kind of roll up your sleeves and build community and help neighbors help each other was modeled for me. So lately I've been thinking like, yeah, I'm my mother's daughter.
The real practical, like Midwest Catholicism.
Oh yeah, like bring a hot dish to somebody and, help them push their car when it's stuck in the snow because it's what we do. Yeah.
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 How long have you been in the Twin Cities then?
I moved here in 2020, so my first year I lived in South Minneapolis, first year and a half, and then I've been in a north suburb of St. Paul, and the parish where I serve, the Church of St. Timothy, is in Blaine, which is a north suburb. So just for context for listeners, ICE is active around the Twin Cities metro area. So like Minneapolis is in the news specifically, but I mean there's kind of throughout the metro area, there has been and continues to be significant ICE activity.
Yeah. Uh, the Twin Cities have been through a lot, even just in the past 6 months. There was the murder of your state representative, Melissa Hortman, last summer. Then at the beginning of the school year, there was the shooting at Annunciation School during their opening mass,
Yeah.
which, like, as a parent who had kids in Catholic school, it was that was horrific. And now, for the past 2 months, at least, the surge of ICE and their violent presence in the Twin Cities. How is the? I mean, this is a big question that we're going to spend the rest of the conversation unpacking. But how is the Catholic community in the Twin Cities doing at this moment?
It's hard. I think I can safely say I can speak for us, for Catholics in the Twin Cities metro, and for a lot of, folks in the Twin Cities metro that were tired. I was in a gathering yesterday where someone said, "I'm tired of being tired," right? So there's a lot of cumulative grief of these things layering on top of one another. And I think, what with the ICE presence, what makes it different from, the political shootings in June that you mentioned and the Annunciation school shooting is it's like this open-ended thing of where is this going and how long is this going to last? So it's challenging, and difficult. And that said, at the same time, like I'm so proud to be a Minnesotan, and I think the way that people are showing up right now is amazing. There's a journalist that coined the term neighborism to describe how people are showing up. And I just hear so many stories from so many different people of people who are driving their, you know, kids, immigrants who aren't leaving home, like their kids are being driven to and from school by another parent in class, and so much mutual aid, people pitching in to pay rent, people buying and delivering groceries, people going into local restaurants and, buying food and buying gift cards and just all of these ways. I stopped at a little Mexican grocery store in Minneapolis to buy some Super Bowl food, and it was just absolutely packed. And there was a guy next to me in line, and we kind of, in the way that Minnesotans do, we made small talk first about the weather because that's again what we do. But then I said something like, "Wow, it's really crowded in here." He said, "Well, yeah, I mean, this is a great place. They have great food," and so he said, "It's a good idea anytime, but especially now." And I was like, "Yep, that's who we are, right? Like this sense of care and goodness and caring about knowing who our neighbors are and helping them as we can." And as I talk with immigrants who feel vulnerable, that solidarity and support there's such a appreciation. There was a woman I visited Friday whose husband was deported 10 days ago, and she hasn't walked out her door in weeks. And she said to me, "I know that there's more people that love us than there are people that hate us," because of the way that people are responding. So that's just, yeah, I mean, there's real moral beauty. There's just human goodness in the midst of it. And in some ways, like things become clear in contrast. So like the more that there's just violence and cruelty and over the top ugly behavior, like the more beautiful the kindness and the outreach and the acts of compassion, the more beautiful those become.
Yeah. One thing that stands out, thinking about, as you're talking about how the community is coming together, but then talking about these different tragedies that have happened. what's happening with ICE seems different. So like when a hurricane hits a major city in the U.S., there's like a national recognition of like we need to rally around these people.
Hmm.
Um, we don't blame New Orleans for getting hit by a hurricane, right? Um, and even with the school shooting, there was a national recognition of like these families are suffering, these families are victims, these families are survivors, and a like we need to like seek justice and like prosecute the person who caused this harm. Um, with ICE, it's different. I mean, that's like flipped on its head in so many ways where um, the city is being blamed for what's going on. The people are being um, who are being detained, who are being arrested, who are being shot in the street, are being painted um, as the real antagonists. I mean, with the former head of ICE when he was interviewed after Alex Preddy was shot, he said, uh, it was the ICE officers who were the real
Yeah.
victims, and
Yeah.
it was the man who was killed. He's the one who he was the aggressor here.
Yeah, he wanted to carry out a massacre because we can
Yeah.
we can read his mind after we kill him and know what his intentions were. Yeah.
So how is that experience different on the ground when like if this were a natural disaster there would be that rallying and now there's like a split. I see people in my community who are rallying and then people who are like kind of like well the twin cities are just bringing it upon themselves for being so disorderly.
Right. Yeah. It is. It's wild. I struggle to engage with in a charitable way with people who hold that perspective, right? Who are and it's because people are consuming news sources that tell them that, right? And and being here on the ground, it's like it's not my reality. Like I know someone who was deported 10 days ago and he's not a drug lord and he's not a rapist and he's not a murderer. Like I know that, you know? And yet if people, the information that they're being fed, right, is this particular narrative, then they base their opinions and on that narrative. So it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to be lied about. It's hard to
Yeah.
be, painted in such a terrible light. And I feel like so much of my ministry in when I'm reaching out to immigrants who are feeling vulnerable and who many of them aren't leaving home and they're not going to work, and in some cases their workplaces have closed, right, because they don't have a workforce. I feel like so much of what I'm doing is saying, like, we are with you, the church is with you, we're praying for you. There are so many of us that don't believe the lies. We don't believe that you're a terrible person. We don't believe that you're a criminal. We appreciate that you want, your children to grow up happy and healthy and that you work hard, right? And it just, whether we had baptisms at mass a couple weeks ago, and it just makes me think that it makes me think of how we have to reject lies, we have to reject falsehood. And I do think that, people in good faith can have different ideas about policy and different ideas about laws and like the nitty gritty of how that plays out. But I don't see how you can be a sincere and faithful Orthodox Catholic and find human dignity to be negotiable, right?
Yeah.
Even if someone did something wrong, like we still don't believe that we don't believe in the death penalty. We don't
Yep.
believe in take we believe in the sanctity of human life.
Yeah.
That's just non-negotiable. So, it's like I find myself trying to encourage people who are so dehumanized and so victimized by this rhetoric that I don't believe it. There's so many of us who don't believe it and who care for them and walk with them. And that's what Pope Leo told a group of Hispanic ministry leaders when they traveled to, I guess it was in October. A colleague of mine was there, and he said, you have the work of helping people know that they're not abandoned and that God is with them. And so I think, I'm aware as a Minnesotan of this narrative that, oh, it's these, agitators and rioters that are out doing these terrible things and obstructing law enforcement, and if they just would calm down and cooperate, right? And it's sort of like, and I think, I don't know if people understand that this is not this is not functioning like normal law enforcement, right?
Right.
Like the first time that I saw, like I said, I served as a Jesuit volunteer in Nicaragua after college, and I traveled to El Salvador for the celebration of the Jesuit martyrs and visited the site where Oscar Romero was killed. This was before he was canonized. And I remember seeing someone, like with a big machine gun, like a big weapon, right? I guess guarding a bank. And I just remember viscerally, this was over 20 years ago, like, oh my gosh, you're just walking down the street and here's someone with this big weapon. And now that's Minneapolis, St. Paul, right? And these people are masked, and it's, I mean, if you've ever been pulled over for speeding, my experience has been like, they come over, hi, I'm officer so and so, I'm from the county of blah blah blah, it's police department, do you know how fast you like, these people are not coming over and telling you their name. You can't see their badge and their identification. Like, it's not clear even which federal agency they're with some of the times. So just the level of violence and terror and intimidation that feels like it's made to be a spectacle, right? Like, it's made to be
Yeah.
a spectacle of cruelty. And
It's
that
intimidating
is,
on purpose.
excuse me?
It's intimidating on purpose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the idea is, right, to make people afraid. And if you do the right things, then, you have nothing to be afraid of. And as long as you stay in line, right, nothing bad will happen to you.
Which is even from, I mean, I saw reporting today that ICE's own numbers in 2025, only 12% of the people they detained had a violent criminal record.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so it's not, I mean, yeah, it's factually not true that if you aren't a criminal, then you'll be just fine. But even then, your point of, and Pope Francis talks about this in Fratelli Tutti when he talks about the death penalty, even for those who are violent criminals, who have done, you know, the worst things people can do,
Right.
the Pope says, if we can respect the dignity of the worst of criminals, we can respect the dignity of everybody. That's what we are called to, as Christians, as Catholics. Well, one thing that comes to mind, I do a lot of work with individual survivors of abuse, and an aspect that often comes that's distinct from trauma, but usually wrapped up in the experience of trauma, is the experience of moral injury, which is this
Yeah.
experience of profound moral betrayal. And if you talk with survivors, say, of like clerical sexual abuse in the church, most will say that the experience of betrayal from the institution after they reported their abuse was more harmful to them than the abuse itself.
Yeah.
And this is a really common experience shared by people who've experienced other types of abuse and trauma, right? This experience of betrayal. And that's what comes to mind, not necessarily on an individual level, but though yes, on an individual level. But it seems like on a community level, in the Twin Cities as a whole, and then also within the migrant communities, even just non-white communities
Yeah. Yeah.
in the Twin Cities, of it's not just that this bad thing's happening to us, it's that we are also actively being betrayed by those who have a responsibility to care for us. That's very much a part of this experience in ways that other tragedies, it's not often a part of the experience.
Yeah, I've heard the acronym DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim, and
Yes.
offender.
Yep.
And that is what is happening here, like you said. Alex Preddy, because he was carrying a weapon, right? Which, Second Amendment, it was concealed. He had a permit, all the things, right? But that makes him the aggressor, and the
Yep.
agents are the victim, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Michigan. I remember protests at the state capitol during the pandemic where all these guys with open carry rifles show up, in body armor and open carry rifles, and they're not shot by law enforcement just because they're carrying guns, because that's not how the United States works.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's so mind-bending because I've, in different roles in ministry and ways I've served, I've done like a lot of know your rights trainings, and explaining to people, you have the right to remain silent, and if someone comes to your door, ask to see a judicial warrant, and it has to be signed by a judge, and all of these things. And I went to a constitutional observer training. It was actually the Saturday after Renee Good was shot, and it was like standing room only at this Lutheran church in Roseville. And even as they're kind of training us on how things work, it's like, well, this is your First Amendment right, but it's like, but we know that's not being respected, right? So
Yeah.
it's this mind-bending thing of, if you do direct action, you make a choice on your level of risk because you understand like what the parameters are, right? Like if you're going to protest, well, if you stand here, then, then you're okay. But if someone comes and says, now this is a non-lawful assembly, please disperse, then, but like that's not happening, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this, it makes it really hard to discern right action and understand what level of risk you're taking because due process, norms aren't being followed, right? The First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, all of these things. Yeah, I mean, now they're saying that they only need an administrative warrant to enter someone's home without their consent, which is really terrifying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very much fox guarding the hen house, right? And I think particularly for people who, you know, yeah, I mean the other piece of it that we haven't talked about with life in the Twin Cities is the murder of George Floyd in 2020 by a police
Yeah.
officer. And I listened to an interview with the chief of police in Minneapolis, Brian O'Hara, and it's like they've worked really hard to try to rebuild relationships with the community after that. And then for this to come, it just sort of, blows things up again. So this idea of a community where people are safe because there's this social contract of there's people who are supposed to protect and serve, and we have this which of course it never works perfectly, right? We're imperfect human beings, but there's basically this sort of system that we agree we're operating in, and it feels like that system's just exploded, right?
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
do you even I went to this prayer vigil at the Whipple building, and it's like, well, should I not wear my contact lenses in case there's tear gas? Like, would it be better to wear my glasses?
Yeah.
If I get detained, so I put all these granola bars in my pocket because I heard that, they're not really giving food to detainees at the Whipple building, and that might not be true. And then I'm like, well, then I should bring my rosary because then I could lead people in the rosary if I'm there. And then, I mean, but it's like I'm going for a prayer vigil in this like contained space, but it feels like you don't know what to expect anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas, I've been to like the March for Life several different times, and I've never had to ask myself those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
And there's, hundreds of thousands of people assembled at something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, to shift back to the outline, I'd prepared a little bit. You were quoted recently in a really great article at the Religion News Service. And I want to read one section of it. So the article said, she described, referring to you, she described a community afraid to leave their homes, go to work, and attend school. Quote, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of sadness. Besides the risk of being arrested, Rhonda said, the immigrants she ministers to despair at being depicted as criminals or rapists. Quote, if people just tell you over and over that you're terrible and treat you like you're terrible, it kind of starts to mess with your mind. As someone local, as a Catholic who is ministering to the Catholic community, including Hispanic members of the community, Latino members of the community, documented or undocumented, how is ICE's presence the last couple of months impacting um, that community's lives?
Negatively. That's an understatement. But yeah, I mean, and I think, we don't have a large immigrant population at the Church of St. Timothy. I mean, we have some, but I mean, we're not impacted the way that parishes that have large immigrant communities do. I know of some parishes that they're feeding like 300 or 400 families a week, right? Like they've turned their parish hall into there's people who grocery shop, and there's the non-perishables, and there's the toiletries, and people come in and they drive, and it's all. So there's parishes that have been much more impacted, I think, on that in that practical way, in terms of their ministering to more people who aren't leaving their homes. But I think even just for your regular, well, I say non-immigrant, but it's like, okay, they're what, third or fourth generation Scandinavian American, probably, if we're going to be honest, right? Like me, right? I'm the great granddaughter of immigrants from Eastern Europe, who came to Minnesota in the early 1900s. But yeah, I mean, they're concerned about the fact that ICE is outside their children's and their grandchildren's schools. They're concerned about, kids not playing in the backyard anymore because they don't, you know, um, want people to, they don't want kids to see, ICE agents and people with weapons and people with face masks, because that's scary. And how do you explain to your kid what's going on? Um, there's a woman in the parish community who teaches in Columbia Heights, which is the school district where Liam Conejo Ramos, who's the kind of the famous picture of the little
Yeah.
kindergartner in the bunny hat, and there's been several children from that school district that have been detained, not just him. And she just describes it as a real heaviness there. So we prayed a novena for peace at the Church of St. Timothy in January, which the pastor and I had already started working on it kind of before Renee Good was shot, because again, coming out of the shootings in June, and then the Annunciation School shooting, and really emphasizing Pope Leo's focus on peace, so wanting to draw on his January 1st Day of Peace message, and then and also to draw on the witness of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and what we learn from his example of, Christian nonviolent direct action to overcome injustice. But we gathered, a group of us who prayed the novena gathered, and yeah, there's just a lot of heaviness, a lot of fear and sadness and anger and concern, and people either themselves or people in their family or their immediate circle, right? If they're working in healthcare, if they're working in education, if they have immigrant neighbors maybe who are Hmong or who are Somali or who are where, there's just, it feels like there's all these ripple effects out. It's impacted local business owners, right? Like there's restaurants that have been shuttered. There's businesses that are struggling because people aren't going out, and workers are being picked up, right? I went to a restaurant, like at least any restaurant in Minneapolis I've been to in the last couple of weeks has signs on the door saying, ICE, or, all these agencies aren't permitted. And then, the door to the kitchen says employees only. 'Cause there's all these kind of processing in place to try to keep people safe who are still going to
Yeah.
work. And as you said, it's not just immigrants, right? Like I know so many, documented immigrants, people who have legal permanent residence, people who have various forms of status, people who were born here, but are carrying their passports because they're not white, or they just feel like there's enough uncertainty that it's better to be able to prove their legal status at any time, which is not how America's supposed to work.
Yeah. Um, how has this impacted, like, shifting this personally? You recognizing that, you had shared your family, your, I think you said what, third generation
Hmm.
here. You're a family of immigrants. I'm a family of immigrants. Um, you're you're not in the demographic being targeted now. Your experience is very different, but it's still impacting you. Um, how is this impacting you? I guess first of all, just as a human being, as a resident of the Twin Cities, um, I mean, I like look at the news and look at the like constant stream of videos caught on people's phones of interactions with ICE, and it looks like I'm watching like a city under like occupation in a different country.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it feels disconnected from every experience I've ever had walking through a city in Michigan in my life. So I guess, yeah, how is it impacting you as a human being?
Physiologically, like there is a level of stress, and I'm not normally an anxious person. Um, so yeah, there is a level of stress and strain. Like some nights I don't sleep real well. I kind of sometimes I think, oh, I'm coping, I'm managing things, and then I'm like, oh, I've got kind of an upset stomach. What's that about, right? Because the body never lies. So there's grief, there's anger, there's sadness, there's a kind of a questioning of where is this going, and and a not knowing, right? Like that this is this ongoing open question, and where will things be in a week or in a month or in 6 months? And also I feel a lot of love and a lot of connectedness and a lot of joy and in being able to connect people who need to give and people who need to receive, right? Those are both
Mm.
needs. And I can be kind of the dot connector in some ways, which is really joyful and meaningful.
Well, like your mom with the moving truck.
Like my mom. Yep, yep. Shout out to Claudia Miska. And it's also just beautiful to see so much loving, faithful, nonviolent, peaceful resistance. And I mean, I know there's some that's been a little snarkier, right? But the vast majority is, people, with signs saying we love our neighbors and love is what makes us great. And I mean, there's these really positive, affirming human messages. I was part of, maybe you've heard of Singing Resistance. It's this movement
Mm-mm.
to basically to gather to sing. So last Sunday, there was about 2,000 of us that gathered in a church in downtown Minneapolis. And we walked about a mile, and it was nice. It was only like 29 degrees, which 29 degrees and no wind at this point feels like balmy. But we sang outside hotels where ICE is staying, and the messages were things like, people were holding a sign that says, "Return to your heart. I know you're human. Do you? Stop the violence and come back home. Your mother called and she wants you to come home." Right? So it's
Mm.
this. It just felt like, oh, this is Ash Wednesday. Like we're calling people to repentance. We're calling people to their own humanity. And this, we sang this song, "It's okay to change your mind. Show us your courage and leave this behind. Join us." So it's not, this doesn't have to be like, oh, you're either for immigrants or you're like for law enforcement, and it's like, no, we're calling for humanity. We're calling for beloved community. We're not calling for to be against anyone, right? Like we're calling for the common good, to use,
Yeah,
right, that term from Catholic social teaching. So it's beautiful to witness that and be a part of it. I guess as
yeah,
someone I've studied King, I've taught King, I've taught Catholic social teaching. So there's this sort of like, I feel like I'm living in the laboratory of it now after having, taught it and kind of more, in a parish or in a university.
yeah, yeah. To jump to that, how is this impacting? I mean, we shared earlier, right? The mix of have to have to advertise the Lenten fish fries and have to help a woman at risk of deportation. And as a parent, like come up with the who's going to take care of my kid if I get deported.
Yeah.
Um, in other ways, how is this impacting your life as a lay minister?
Yeah, it's this dual reality, right? Of getting ready for Ash Wednesday, getting ready for Lent, doing everything that's involved with that. Normal parish life goes on, right? Like we have funerals and funeral luncheons and pastoral care that needs to happen. And then there's this overlay on top of it, right? At the same time. And I've been really, so I think, our attempts, the pastor and I have been working pretty closely together for quite a few months now around promoting peace. We created this peacemaker pledge, and we had a prayer for peace after the Annunciation shooting. And then the novena for peace was another follow-up from that. So I feel like just trying to continue to give people tools for prayer and for action, to make sense of these times the best that we can, and to respond faithfully, and to give people a chance to gather and to be in community and to be nourished by community and sacrament. The kind of our parish tagline is nourished in love and sent to serve. You gather, you're nourished at the Eucharist, and then you're sent out. And I feel like that feels really true.
Yeah.
I have people, emailing and calling saying, how can I help? And I work at this place so I can get a discount on certain items and I can bring those and I could do this and do we need people to bring communion? And so it's joyful to witness that moral beauty.
Yeah. Is there an element of, I think of you know of the stories of saints that so often the stories of saints, like their lives happened in times of turmoil and violence and persecution. Perhaps my favorite saint, Maximilian Kolbe, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
his heroism shines through in the midst of, yeah, I mean, in the midst of hell on earth. Um, but so many of the saints' lives are that way, where we see, like, not just humanity, but like humanity with grace and what that's capable of. Um, those stories are compelling because it's like there's real vulnerability, there's real risk, there's real heroism in those stories, and that is so different to, again, like white Midwest, in my case, like rural Catholicism. There's very little risk. Um, but you're in a situation now where I imagine that real risk and that real vulnerability is now present in ways it was not present before. I mean, the last few Sundays we've been reading from the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
Those words, I imagine, like, and I've imagined, man, how does the Sermon on the Mount sound to someone like Bonhoeffer? How does the Sermon on the Mount sound to someone like Oscar Romero? How does the Sermon on the Mount sound to Rhonda?
Yeah. It is. The readings have just been phenomenal the last couple of weeks. In fact, a parishioner commented the other day, the reading from Isaiah about, remove, malicious speech and share your bread with the hungry, and then the light will shine and the gloom will be like midday. And this parishioner was like, wow, it feels like these readings were just made for these times. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But yeah, the Sermon on the Mount, I will say scripture has a new richness and freshness and urgency for me. I think I appreciate in a way that I've always intellectually understood, because I have a master's in pastoral ministry and I'm getting a doctorate in ministry and I've, kind of like a lifelong learner type person. And I'm like, yeah, okay, Jesus lived in the context of the Roman Empire and, this is what that looked like. But it feels true in a new way that Jesus was born into that, lived and ministered in that, was put to death. All within that system, right? That has a resonance and immediacy to me that it hasn't before, right? That makes his message of love and community all the more powerful. And I think for me, I preached on the Beatitudes for a website, so it was really a gift. I sort of traveled through the Christmas season with the Beatitudes, knowing that I was going to be preparing to preach, And really where I landed with it is that like the Beatitudes are like a pair of glasses. Like they're these lenses that we put on. Because kind of where the world will tell us to focus our attention is like who's on the wealthy and on the powerful and the ones with a big platform. And yet Jesus is saying, no, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who are persecuted, right? And so it's like looking at those people and looking at the people who are peacemakers and who love mercy, right? Like letting that be where I put my focus and my attention is, yeah, I feel like I'm just living into that every day.
Yeah.
So there is, I mean, man, reading the Psalms, reading the prophets. There's a native and indigenous leader here named Jim Bear Jacobs, who's, I think he's an ordained minister in a Protestant denomination. I'm not exactly sure which one, but I remember hearing him say once that the Bible can really only be understood by people who are living under empire or under domination. And I remember when I first heard that, I was like, well, that's not fair. Like, I can understand the Bible. And now I'm like, oh, yeah, there is this, like, there is a level of risk. There is a level of threat. And then I kind of step back on myself and I'm like, am I being paranoid? But yeah, it's like I visit people and I visit someone and she's like, yeah, ICE agents were here yesterday and they had their weapons drawn. So it's like I don't think I'm being paranoid.
Yeah.
And the risk isn't zero, right? But I feel like I keep coming back to, there's that line in the first principle and the foundation of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola of praying, not preferring riches over poverty, health over sickness, a long life over a short life. And so this sense of really being so, the Ignatian term is indifference, having such a level of indifference that, it's great if I can be both faithful and be safe. But if I have to choose, I want to be faithful, if I
Yeah.
have to choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind as you're talking about that line about the gospel can only be understood by those who've lived under oppression, I think back to at the opening of Jesus's public ministry where he's in the synagogue and he reads, oh man, now the line
The
just
Spirit
like
of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news.
to the
Yeah.
poor.
To the poor. Yeah.
Like the good news was first meant for the poor, and then right the church's understanding of the poor, it isn't just the materially poor, it's all who are vulnerable and marginalized and oppressed by the powerful. Like there's a sense of like the gospel's for everyone, but in this like this beautiful teaching of like the preferential option for the poor, God's preference for the poor, the good news has a preference for those who are oppressed
Yeah.
and those who are vulnerable and
Yeah.
marginalized. That's what I hear when I hear you sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Pope Leo just laid it out so beautifully in De Lexite, right? I mean, this has always been the teaching of the church, and this is just non-negotiable, right? I did a
Yeah.
10-week series on Catholic social teaching at the parish in the fall, and one day, someone who came to all the sessions was like, "Wow, the church is really about caring about poor people," and I'm like, "Good, you got the point, like." Success. Like that is if that's your one takeaway, then like my job here is done. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, uh, to shift to shift back again to maybe start talking about hope. You shared an article with me that you wrote just a couple of weeks ago for your home parish, St. Thomas
Hmm.
More, and I wanted to share a passage from that.
Yeah.
So you're reading what you wrote. You said, in Ignatian spirituality, we engage in imaginative prayer, placing ourselves in the scripture scene and trusting that God can speak through our imagination. And as we are in the Twin Cities, surrounded by thousands of masked, armed, and untrained federal agents carrying out unconstitutional and inhumane enforcement actions against citizens and non-citizens alike, Perhaps we can engage the power of imagination as part of our faithful nonviolent resistance. We can imagine a world where the human dignity of all is seen and respected, where meaningful pathways for immigration are created, where enforcement is only carried out humanely and lawfully, where families live in safety instead of fear, where people of every background reverence one another as members of one human family. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Where do you see light in the midst of the darkness that you've been talking about?
Yeah, and I feel like this is maybe not not the answer you maybe want to hear, but I think it's not hope is optimism. I call that throw pillow hope, right? Like the kind of throw pillow that you embroider on the hope you embroider on a throw pillow with like pastel colors and live, laugh, love or whatever. I mean, it's this, it's like it's not a guarantee that things will work out well. The famous passage about hope is from Romans, and you think about Paul's context when he wrote to the church in Rome, and that is a city where he eventually was put to death, right? So hope does not mean everything is going to go according to my agenda and preferences. So I wouldn't say I'm hopeful in like, okay, I know this is going to have an immediate and practical resolution in the way that I would prefer. I mean, I do have hope in that, like, love wins. Like, that's the Paschal mystery. That's faith.
Yeah.
That's Christianity. That's the gospel. In the end, love is stronger than death, and Easter triumphs over Good Friday. So, like, from like the 10,000 feet perspective, that is hope. But I feel like I've had to let go. I found myself it kind of in prayer wrestling with my mind, wanting to go either to like the best case scenario or the worst case scenario of like, okay, somehow like this is just all going to go away, and our systems of checks and balances will be restored and things will be normal. And then, or I would go to this worst case scenario of like super dystopian. And I just felt like as I journaled and prayed and wrestled with it, like just coming back to this vulnerability of not knowing and being with Jesus in the not knowing and letting it be hard, and trusting that there's sufficient grace, right? To quote St. Ignatius of Loyola again. So it's this very sort of present moment. Like it's a terrible way to learn mindfulness, but it's a very effective way to learn mindfulness of like you can't let your mind go to like what will things look like in a week or a month or 6 months. Like that's not fruitful. It's just, okay, what is God calling me to in the next hour, in the next day, and know that I have the grace to do that, and lean on the supportive community. And I do think there's a way in which, yeah, I guess light, where light shines in the darkness is also, I do feel like the church is being the church in a way that's really beautiful. And yeah, it's almost like I've heard it said in like in the history of monasticism, right? Like, an order starts out like pretty strict, and then they make enough money and they get kind of a comfortable life, and then, someone comes along and reforms, and so it's this, and I almost feel like, okay, we've been able to be sort of comfortable as Catholics and
For a long time
for a
in this
long
country.
time, right? Or at least as I don't know, as white Catholics, and there's a whole lot of
Yep.
else we
Yep.
can
Yep.
unpack, but for to overgeneralize. And now there's this point where it's like this might actually cost something. And then when we face that and we live faithfully in spite of the cost, like that's inherently evangelizing, I believe. In the story that from Religion News Service, it mentions my friend Anne, who was part of this on the Feast of the Presentation, this gathering where about 100 Catholics went and prayed the rosary outside this apartment building where ICE had taken some families and where a lot of people were sheltering in place. And so you have these English-speaking Catholics standing on the street, and you have these Spanish-speaking Catholics in this apartment building praying the rosary back and forth. And, coming to the windows and looking out and seeing these people with their lit candles. And I was, there was someone who was at that gathering who I think had been thinking about becoming Catholic, but was sort of on the fence. And that experience was like, oh yeah, like sign me up, right? So I think about stories like that of, when the church is the church, it's inherently beautiful, it's inherently attractive. That if we are authentically, if who we say we are and what we say we believe, if we live that out, that's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Another story. This was in earlier in November before Operation Metro Surge, but still, yeah, enforcement's been going on for a long time. It's just in the last 3 months that it's ramped up. But there was in St. Paul, there was a immigration action, and on a Tuesday afternoon, and I saw this announcement that there was going to be a gathering the next day, and I was like, okay, it's early enough in the morning that I can go and then start my work day. And I didn't have time to make a sign, so I have a framed image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I grabbed my framed image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and drove down to this kind of manufacturing area. And this was not like a church organized event. I mean, there were civic leaders there and there were labor leaders there. But I watched people like respond. So they'd look at this image I'm holding and then they'd look at me and I could see this response. And at one point, there was a woman who looked at the image and she just, visually, I could see she just was really moved. And she looked at me and she said, I was raised Catholic, but, and then she broke down in tears and she just sort of kind of leaned towards me and embraced me. And I just held her and prayed silently. And I don't know her story and it's not mine to know, but having just a Catholic symbol, having an image of Our Lady at this gathering that was marking where, this enforcement action had taken place and a family had been torn apart the day before, was clearly very impactful, right? So I think there is, yeah, like when we honor human dignity and we're willing to be public about that and stand in integrity the best that we can as Catholics. Not that we ever do it perfectly, because we're all fallen sinful people. But when we can do that, it's attractive. I mean, I think about in Acts chapter 2, where it talks about the believers had everything in common and shared, and no one was in need, and they gathered for prayer, and awe fell upon them, and their number grew every day, right? And I think, oh, that's what this is like. Like in the face of turmoil and chaos, you know, we've heard from people who've come to Mass and they hear something in the homily and express appreciation. Thank you for naming this, right? So I think there's a beautiful opportunity for the church to be the church. And when I see that happening and experience that happening and get to be a part of that happening, like that is, it's just joyful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you tied this to evangelization. So I worked, in parish ministry for a long time.
Yeah.
And evangelization was like the word everyone used, right?
Yeah.
And we had like all these books and all these programs and like all this stuff.
Mm-mm.
And that's a conversation for a different time. But what you just said, it reminds me of like, you also said when the church is actually church. There's a line from the early church, I forget who said it, that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. That when the church actually chooses to make itself vulnerable for the sake of integrity to the gospel and to human dignity, that's when its witness is most powerful.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that stands in absolute contrast to, I remember a Facebook conversation I had with a good friend of mine after January 6th and the storming of the Capitol. And on a public page, my friend had said something about how scandalizing it was to see so much Christian imagery at an event like this. It was about seizing power. And someone who was a professor at Catholic University on a public page said, I will not apologize for my support of this administration because for the first time in a long time, we have a seat in the halls of power. And like, I loved the clarity because it was like, thank you for being honest. And also, that is the absolute counter witness, right? Like driving and grasping after cultural and political power and influence and sacrificing integrity in the process. Um, that's the anti-gospel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the temptation, right? That's, Satan saying to Jesus, just look
It,
out at this kingdom and this could all be yours, right? I
yeah,
mean, we're going to hear that in Lent here just in a few weeks,
yeah.
right?
So how is this? I mean, I talked about this with Jen Morrison a couple of weeks ago of just how like betrayed and scandalized I've felt by looking at the leaders, the Catholic leaders in the pro-life movement who helped form so much of the values that I have in a positive way, just abandoned those values for partisanship, for a seat in the halls of power. Um, and here we are in this moment looking at what's going on in Minneapolis and elsewhere. And there's so many Catholic leaders who are still like, who are defending, who are perpetuating the lies and the violence coming from this administration, or who are silently condoning it.
Right.
That, like,
Yeah, and silence is taking the side of the oppressor, right? I think it was maybe I'm getting this wrong. Nelson Mandela who said, if an elephant is standing on the tail of the mouse and you do nothing, you're on the side of the elephant.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And Pope Francis talks about this in a Fratelli Tutti, where he's like, the we do not weigh morally um, violence against the state from individuals or groups as we do violence committed by the state
right,
towards individuals and
right.
groups. Like
Yeah,
these are not the same thing.
yeah,
Um, so here we are in this moment, and I continue to feel this tension, this deep discomfort, and betrayal. How are you sitting in this? How is this like? You're talking about the moments of where you see your Catholic faith, where you see where you're being evangelized by those who are putting themselves at risk for the sake of integrity and human dignity and the gospel. I imagine you're also finding yourself betrayed and scandalized, watching those in comfort not doing that.
yeah.
How do you exist as a Catholic in that space?
Right. We always exist with all this complexity, right? And just thank you for naming power. I feel like that's a really important word in this moment, and I want to lift up the work of a mentor of mine and a friend. Her name is Dr. Ann Garrido, and she has a book called Redeeming Power, where she interviewed a bunch of different Catholic leaders about power and this question of how do you use it well. And it's Ave Maria Press published it maybe 2 years ago. It's just an excellent resource, kind of getting at those questions, right? So yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true, right? That I mean, it was striking and encouraging, right, when the U.S. bishops gathered in November in Baltimore and came out with this statement, that included the line, we oppose the indiscriminate mass deportation of people,
Yeah.
right? And then several bishops made videos, right? So there's this whole video montage of different bishops speaking part of that, including our own Archbishop here, Archbishop Hebda in the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, and as you said, right, it's not everyone. And I think for me, it's so positive and encouraging when bishops speak out. I know Auxiliary Bishop Kevin Kenny was just on the America Media podcast, and I was actually with him on the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. There was a group of us that gathered at the Whipple Building because a mom of a Catholic school family had been detained, and so it was on the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and we were there. We gathered to pray. So there, absolutely there are bishops that speak out positively, and that's wonderful. And I think maybe this is also my experience because I'm a woman in the church, so there's also just a layer of those avenues of power aren't open to me. So I also feel like it's this strange both and of like, yes, I love it when the bishops come out with a great statement, or an individual bishop or Pope Leo, right? Like, yay, that's great. I'm going to make it into a beautiful, quotation and put it on the parish social media and include it in the email newsletter and include it in my email reflections that I send out and all those things. And at the same time, like I think there's a weird internalized clericalism that happens if I, as a Catholic, I'm like, oh, why don't the bishops speak out? And why aren't, because it's sort of like, well, I'm baptized. I'm baptized priest, prophet, and king. Like, I am a fully initiated adult Catholic that has all the grace I need to live my faith. And so it's like if I'm kind of sitting here with my arms crossed, waiting for a bishop to tell me what to do or to give me permission or encouragement, rather than just to go out and perform the works of mercy and live the gospel, then I'm like disempowering myself. So I think there's a way in which this is just a moment to take our baptism and run with it, and be grateful and appreciative when bishops choose to use their voice and their power for good. But we don't need that, right? Like we're giving away our own power and agency as the baptized if we put too much focus there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's this really challenging place of like they do have power and they have a responsibility because they have that power. I mean, this is Spider-Man, right? Great power comes great responsibility,
Totally.
right?
Yep.
And them abdicating that responsibility is unjust. And also, just as you said, the Catechism says, I forget what paragraph, but in the section on the Our Father, it talks about how through baptism we are all made other Christs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, priest, prophet, and king, we are all Christ in the world.
Yeah,
And
and I think that's part of some of what synodality, what Pope Francis was trying to get at with the focus on synodality, right? If we're a synodal church, we're all missionary disciples, we're all agents. Um, you know, it's not that 99% of the church are just spectators, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. In work that I do with survivors of abuse in the church, there's a real recognition of like you are just as an important part of the church as your bishop or as the Pope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. And I think that's something we just hang on to, right? And that doesn't mean I'm not trying to diminish the role, right, of the Episcopal part of the church at all. It's just simply to say that I think there's so much that we can do, and I don't know that I don't feel like it's the best use of my time and energy to like try to make the bishops do something, like no, I've got families to visit and groceries to deliver and Eucharist to take to people who aren't leaving home, and the mom who's working on DOPA to check in on, right? Like that's me doing my baptism over here in Minneapolis in February of 2026, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the witness again. I'm thinking of the martyrs. I'm thinking of the White Rose movement in Germany, and these were Lutheran and Orthodox college students who
Yeah.
were martyred for standing up in integrity. I think of like St. Thomas More as a layman in the face of authoritarianism. But I also think of again Maximilian Kolbe when he steps out of line and offers his life in place of the Polish soldier. And the commandant asks him, why are you doing this? And his response is, because I'm a Catholic priest. That
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
a priest does that, or when someone like Oscar Romero as a bishop lays down his life for the sake of the poor and the vulnerable, that that is when clerical authority, like that is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
This hour just flew by.
I know. We could talk forever. It's so fun because I've been listening to you for months and now it gets to be two ways.
And I haven't been listening to you at all, so we could just keep going.
Yeah.
But as we start to wrap up, if listeners would like, and you had shared some with me, if listeners would like to support organizations who are serving vulnerable people on the ground in the Twin Cities, where would you recommend? And I'll put those links in the show notes too.
Yeah, so I would commend to listeners, first of all, thank you for wanting to support. I mean, there's a tremendous need, as you can imagine, if people aren't leaving their homes and aren't working, and the impact on their ability to pay rent and also their ability to participate in their parishes and all of those things. So I know the Catholic Community Foundation of Minnesota has started a fund that people can contribute to, and then various parishes and schools in the Archdiocese can apply for funds to help with, immediate emergency needs. So yeah, if you put that link in the show notes, that's a great way, and it's tax exempt and all those good things. That's a great way to support the Catholic community in the Twin Cities right now.
Yeah. Um, Rhonda, is there anything that we didn't talk about that I didn't ask you that you would like to talk about?
I had so many things I wanted to say. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, going back to this idea of, you brought up how, there's this version of reality wherein Minnesota is bringing this on ourselves for being so, you know, obstructive of law enforcement and all these things, right? And I guess I would just want to say in charity, if you're listening to this right now and you think that Rhonda and Paul are not telling you the truth, right? Or this isn't accurate, that just in charity, like look at other sources, right? In order to discern well, we need accurate information. And accurate information is not easy to come by in a time of misinformation and disinformation and AI and social media algorithms and all of these things. So just an encouragement, to, as a Catholic that wants to think well and discern well, to seek out a variety of sources of information.
Oh.
Yeah, if you can fit that in somewhere.
Um, Rhonda, thank you so much for this conversation, and for all the work that you're doing and your presence in the midst of what's going on in the Twin Cities. Thank you for the integrity that you're showing in being as Christ for the most vulnerable, but also in being evangelized by Christ through the vulnerable. Thank you so much. Where can people follow you or find your work if you want them to follow you?
Sure, yeah. Well, I don't have a Substack or a website or anything like that, but as I said, I'm on staff at the Church of St. Timothy, so that's churchofsttimothy.com. So I mentioned our Novena for Peace. I mentioned our Peacemaker Pledge. People can find those things on the website if they'd like. And then I preach and write pretty regularly for U.S. Catholic Magazine. So that's uscatholic.org. So if people go there and look up my name, you can find stuff I've written. And then I have a couple book chapters out as well. I'm pretty Googleable. So if you Google me, you can find the books I've contributed to. Yeah, at this point, I don't have like a Substack, and that's not coming anytime soon in the midst of my current reality.
Rhonda, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And, for all you're doing and for the chance to share my experience here on the ground.
And thank you for listening to the Third Space podcast. If you like this conversation, please subscribe. Episodes will be released every other week. And please share it with a friend and give it a rating and review in your favorite podcast app so that more people can discover the show. You can sign up for my newsletter or send me a message at catholicthirdSpace.com. And while you're there, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. All of your work directly helps my family and allows me to continue working on projects like this podcast. If you want to schedule individual coaching with me or have me out to speak or consult with your community, parish, seminary, or diocese, please visit livingsolidarity.com. You can also join me at Smart Catholics, the online community for Catholics who want faithful conversations that go beyond easy answers or black and white fundamentalism in order to hold on to all that is true. That's smartcatholics.com. Thanks for listening.